aviation is a terrific fraternity, and to be able to have done what I've done for as long as I have is really a privilege. I'm setting a new record every day, and sooner or later it's going to come to the end, and I'm going to be absolutely positively 100% fine with that. But every day is a blessing until that happens.
Incredible.
Hi everyone, my name's Dick Horowitz, and I'm standing here in the Wings of Hope hangar in front of one of our Wings of Hope medical relief and air transport airplanes. I have, for the last 9 years approximately, been the chief pilot of the pilot group at Wings of Hope, and I've just recently retired from that position at the based on an age limit from the board of directors. But I'll still be a part of the equation around here doing flight training and flight checks, and we do a lot of those for our pilots in the MAP program at Wings. And so I hope to be involved here at Wings for some time in the future. I was a second-class electronics technician in the Navy, a certified reactor operator, and someone in the Navy wisely realized that it was a really bad idea to have Horowitz around a bunch of nuclear missiles on a submarine, and the only place they could figure out to send me to make the world safe from a nuclear holocaust was Lafayette, Indiana. So the Navy sent me to Purdue. So I was living in the dorms, and the guy across the hall had just gotten his private license. And I said, hey, want to go for an airplane ride? I can take you, I'm a pilot. And so I went for an airplane ride with him, and I was hooked. I learned to fly, sort of. I haven't got that done yet, and even though I have licenses that say other things, I am definitely, absolutely definitely a student pilot. I have about 26,000 hours. I have never had a flight, including flying with a student who had never been in an airplane before, where I haven't learned something. So I'm a student pilot. So I started flying in the University Flying Club. I got my private certificate. I got my commercial the very same year that I started flying. On December 31st of that year, I got my instructor certificate. And then the Navy, because of some goings-on in Washington, D.C., became unable to pay me a bonus that they owed me by my re-enlistment contract. So I got out. So I was in the Navy for 4 years, and I got out, and I kept on flying. And at the end of 6 years, I had 5,000 hours, most of it instruction. I kept on fixing airplanes, and my boss got nervous about that because I wasn't qualified. So he forced me to study up, and I got an airframe and power plant mechanic certificate. And I had the GI Bill, so I went to Cincinnati to executive jet and got a type rating in Learjet. So there I am at the end of 6 years with 5,500 hours, a Learjet type rating, and A&P. And I was hired as a mechanic for a Learjet operator air taxi in St. Louis. I told the guy who was talking about hiring me, you know, I wouldn't be happy, I'm happy to do maintenance work, but I gotta fly. And he said, oh, I don't think that'll be a problem. They had 4 Lears and a greasy old Beech 18. So I started working on the airplanes, but I started flying the first week I was there. And I was flying approximately I was hired as a mechanic, but I was flying about 125 hours a month in these Learjets, and it was all automobile freight. So I got demoted from mechanic to, finally, I was an official co-pilot, and then I was demoted again to captain, and then I was demoted to being a check airman for this 135 operation. I finally got demoted all the way to director of operations, and there was no lower place to go, so I left and went to work for one of our charter customers, Frucon Corporation. We ended up having 2 Lears and a Bell Jet Ranger helicopter. I was there for 4 years, and a German company bought Frucon, said we don't need no stinking airplanes. Some guy, unfortunately I knew him, I had flown him at Peabody, the guy who was running the flight department, blew an aneurysm in his head and died, so I went in at the bottom of the seniority system. That was in 1982, and I was sent in 1987 to start another flight department, promoted to chief pilot of that flight department in Evansville, Indiana. I was there for 3 years. Came back to St. Louis. I was the chief pilot and director of maintenance until 2012, so I was there just short of 30 years. And then I came to Wings of Hope. The best job that I have ever had anywhere in my flying career, without question, the best job, even with a 0 paycheck. And here I am, and I'm a happy guy. This is our PA-31 Navajo. Just purchased that a short time ago within this year, and this is the airplane in which I was privileged to fly my last medical relief and air transport patient flight for Wings of Hope. I've been privileged to do that for a while, about 9 years, and now I've hit the board-imposed age limit. And so our last flight in this was pretty typical of all of our flights, where we picked up a couple, and he was very much in need of medical help. He was a great guy, and so was she, very appreciative. To be here at Wings of Hope and to be able to be with people in life situations that make them benefit so much from our taking care of some of the mundane things like eating and getting from one place to another and so forth. It's very inspiring. It's really a privilege to be able to help the people that we help. And I've been doing this and training and administratively managing the pilot group for about 9 years now, and it's time for me to step down from doing that. I'll still be doing training flights and check rides. We do lots of check rides and lots of training here at Wings of Hope. And so I'll still be involved in general with Wings of Hope. I've always done lots of other things, been involved in lots of other projects here at Wings of Hope, and that will all continue. It's just that I won't be able to fly patient trips anymore, and that's just fine with me. And this is the airplane that brought me sliding into home base. We're doing an annual inspection on the airplane, and we are taking out all the old avionics that are decades old and putting in lots of new, shiny, much more competent glass stuff in the cockpit that requires just about tearing the whole airplane apart, as you can see. When we get done with that in a short period of time, maybe 3 months from now, it'll have a brand new annual. It'll have 2 freshly overhauled engines and wonderful avionics, and we'll hopefully have a long and happy career here at Wings of Hope, helping the people that we help that so desperately need our help. So that's the story on this. This goes about 200 miles an hour on a good day, and it's very comfortable inside. Not that this is a big deal for me, but you can actually stand up inside it. We basically, at this point, use 3 airplanes for the medical relief and air transport program. This one right here with the Red Cross on the tail is a Seneca 3, and this tan one right here is also a Seneca 3. And so with these 3 airplanes, we handle all of our patient flights. It would look like maybe this airplane being bigger would be more complicated and more difficult to fly than the other airplanes, and that's not the case. It's actually easier to fly, which is a plus. And it's a great airplane. It's really quiet and comfortable, and has a really solid feel when you're flying it. In general, our trips are scheduled a couple of weeks out. Karen Andrews, our dispatcher, assigns the crews. People, we publish what flights we have and people volunteer for them. And there's one pilot who is designated to be in charge administratively of the flight. And he obviously has general responsibility, so he will start checking the weather probabilities maybe a week out, and sometime during that last week before the flight he will have kept up with the weather. He will have probably communicated with the person who's going with him. He will have done a weight and balance computation to make sure the airplane is legal to fly with respect to its center of gravity. It has to be within certain limits, and of course it can't be too heavy. And decide how much fuel to take, and file flight plans with the FAA for our trip. We fly all the trips that we fly on an instrument flight plan, so just like the airlines. And the day before the trip, of course, we do the last and final check on the weather to assess that we're going to be good, and then we show up a minimum on flight day, a minimum of an hour before the flight. Generally, people show up an hour and a half before, and we do last minute weather checks. And if we said, yes, we're going, and we come out here on the morning of the flight and there's all of a sudden a bunch of freezing rain, for example, where we're going, we cancel the trip. Even if we were flying emergent patients, we would do that, because it just doesn't make sense to, it's either reasonably safe to, nothing's perfect, but reasonably safe to fly the trip or not. We cancel very, 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 very few trips because of weather, because we have really competent pilots and really good airplanes with good equipment. But when something comes along, when there's a crosswind that's just going to be ridiculous, or anytime there is a Z in all the weather stuff, when there's a Z in there, that means freezing. It can be freezing fog, freezing rain, freezing drizzle. When there's a Z in there in the forecast, and we can tell that it's legitimate from looking at what's out there, we don't go, and that's the name of that tune. Even though that airplane, the tan airplane over there, is approved for flight into known icing by the FAA. It's not approved for flight into freezing rain by me or anyone with any sense. And so we, at the last, we do a pre-flight inspection on the airplane, make sure that everything we can check is safe for flight. We do a checklist with about 30 items on it. The 2 crew members sit down, or 3 crew members if we're taking a flight medic with us, which we do when we have a stretcher patient. And we go through the checklist item by item to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because that's the deal with the two-person crew. It's not just two pilots in there in case one keels over, the other one can take over. They're an interactive system. We try to take off before our scheduled takeoff time, and we generally go to a place somewhere, a small airport. We refuel the airplane, we greet our passengers, we have them sign liability waivers, and then give a stamped envelope to the local FBO to have them mail back to us. And we load them and their things in the airplane. We give them a briefing, just like the airlines do. We show them how to operate the doors and then tell them they better not unless we're incapacitated. And lots of other basic stuff about the trip. And we fly the trip and try to make it as comfortable as we can. If we're at an altitude that's bumpy, we talk to the controllers and try to find an altitude that's not so bumpy and so forth. And we generally take them to where they're going someplace for medical reasons. We are aware of basically what their medical situation is and what their transportation situation is where they're going. And so we try to coordinate with that, call the airport on the radio when we're on the way in to have them be ready. And we drop our passengers off and wish them luck, fuel the airplane up, and come home. And that's the general conduct of a medical relief and air transport trip. Karen and Dr. Rick Bowen, who's our medical director. He does the medical screening of every patient who's going to ride with us. And the scheduling of appointments and so forth is an interactive process that involves Dr. Bowen, involves the patient's doctors and the patients, and involves Karen Andrews. And among them, they schedule things to accommodate our schedule. Generally, there's probably an extra hour thrown in there. So if we have someone with a 4 o'clock appointment, we try to have them plan to have them walking away from and it takes a half hour to get to where they're going. That would be 3:30. We plan on having them walking away from the airplane at 2:30. So we build in an extra hour before their medical process. Generally not days, but hours. And then frequently, when we go and pick people up, we generally take people where they're going and come back. We don't do too many overnights. Now with the Navajo, with its longer legs, we'll be doing a little more in the way of overnights because we have limits on a lot of things that you don't have to have as a private operator, as an operator who operates under Part 91 of the FAR's, the air regulations. But for example, if we were an air taxi somewhere where you would pay money and say, take me to somewhere in a light airplane, they're limited to 10 hours of flight time with a two-person crew and 14 hours of duty time. That's starting an hour before the first takeoff, going to a half hour after the last landing. Cannot be more than 14 hours. Our limits are 12 hours rather than 14, and 8 hours of flight time rather than 10 hours of flight time, because it's just much harder in our situation to do what we do. There are more variables with our compromised patients, and it's one thing to fly for 10 hours in a jet in your shirt sleeves with the catered food on your sheepskin seat, and it's another thing to fly in a piston airplane that's going a lot slower and it's down in the weather rather than up on top of all the weather and so forth. And so it seemed prudent to have tighter limits on the flight time and duty time, and we respect those. And all this depends on developing relationships with the hospitals in these areas, because our typical thing is that we take people we pick them up where they live, and we take them to a center of excellence for whatever they have. For example, many of the trips we do, we go to places outside of St. Louis and bring people to St. Louis with kids who were born with clubfoot or cleft palate and so forth, musculoskeletal issues that the Shriners Hospital in St. Louis is a center of excellence for. The hospital, the Shriners Hospital, for example, and we don't do only Shriners, but we do a lot of Shriners. The Shriners in Cincinnati, for example, they're a center of excellence for burns. So we would likely go there, and most of the flying that we do is not frontline medically. By that I mean that if someone is burned badly in a fire, we're not likely to throw them in the airplane and take them to Shriners. But if they end up at Shriners in Cincinnati because of the burns, then they have rechecks every month. We've flown some people 70 or 80 times. And that's the sort of flying that we're more likely to do. It is earth-shatteringly difficult for a family to contemplate getting in their car and driving 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 hours to get someplace, trying to make their kid's appointment and trying to find a place to stay overnight. Wings of Hope supports overnight expenses, supports motel, food, rental cars, and so forth for our patients. And so it takes a situation that is extremely difficult for many of our patient families and makes it orders of magnitude more difficult. And just being able to subtract out the food and the transportation issue for them is an enormous help to allow them the resources to deal with the main problem, which is their child's medical situation, and keeping their life together and putting food on the table and a roof over their head. It's the families that we serve really need our help and really benefit from it. And of course, that makes it better for us. I can't help but put myself in their situation and think of what it would be like, and it's just incredibly difficult. Life is difficult enough as it is, and so where we serve, I think we really make a difference for our patient families. We always open both of these back doors to make it easy for folks to get in, and we have water and hearing protection and air sickness bags, and there's a card in there that has a basic briefing, just like getting in an airliner and getting the seat pocket card. And generally we have one patient and one caregiver, so they'll be sitting back here. We will close the door and give them a briefing about how to operate this door and the several other things that we have to brief as an emergency exit. And generally our patients will sit in the back here. If we have a stretcher patient, these devices right here are made to hold the front of the stretcher, and then we seat belt the back of the stretcher down. We take this seat out, and we always take a medic along, a flight medic, and so the flight medic will sit over there. The caregiver that comes with our patient will sit there, and our patient will be on the stretcher here. And so that's the basic idea. Everybody uses hearing protection. We have medical resources in here, medical power in case we need to use a suction machine, for example, something that we don't very often do. Our patients are stable, but we do have the capability to do that, and we have the equipment, and the flight medics are trained in terms of how to do that. If necessary, we can take 2 oxygen bottles with us that fit in here, and the flight medic, of course, generally, if we need oxygen, it's for a stretcher patient. Not always, but whether the stretcher is there or not, if we have oxygen, then we obviously take a flight medic with us, a nurse, to handle the oxygen and so forth. So that's the story here, and the crew would close these doors up and climb up the right wing into the front of the airplane, and off we go. Aviation has been very, very good to me, and I try to do everything that I can to support exposing kids to aviation, encouraging them to consider it as a career path later on in their lives. And really, I've always done this when I was someplace with a corporate jet, and there would typically be a young man and his father leaning on the fence, looking at the airplane, hoping that one would land or take off. And I would start up the auxiliary power unit in our airplane to get air conditioning and to electrify the airplane so we can turn all the equipment on and have all the lights light up. And then I would invite the kid and his father to come and sit down in the airplane. I would put the kid in the left front seat and say, "You're the captain," and I would borrow the phone from the father and go outside the airplane and take a picture through the window of the kid in the captain's seat, and then another one from the inside, to do everything I can to give back to aviation and to encourage other people to be involved in it. We have here at Wings of Hope we call the Soar into STEM program, where we involve school-age kids in coming out here and not only hearing about airplanes, but actually physically getting their hands dirty and taking airplanes apart. We had one crew in here who worked on a Cessna 182, took it all apart and helped put a lot of it back together. And when the airplane was finished, we had a session with them where we showed a video of the airplane taking off to go to South America to be used down there, and the reaction was absolutely incredible. We have one of our original Soar into STEM kids who has just gotten his private license, and it's really to the benefit of operations like Wings of Hope, but to our general population. The more we involve kids in science, technology, and math, and aviation is nothing if not a science and technology oriented operation. It's just wonderful to be involved with these kids, and we expend a lot of effort doing that here at Wings of Hope. I want to say again how honored I am to be here with all you folks, and how excited I am to think of what your futures might be like if you have the interests that you have. So good for you. I also want to say that honestly, I've come through my whole aviation career without any regrets. I never regretted it. I went out to the airport and stayed for 50 years. So we would like the airplane to fly flat unless we're doing something, to not go up and down. And so we have to have something to stabilize the airplane. And that would be this horizontal part right here on both sides. That's called the horizontal stabilizer. You cannot tell whether you're right side up if you can't see anything, if you're inside a cloud. So this is the attitude indicator. It's also called the gyro horizon. It tells you is the nose high or low, is the airplane in the left right thing. Well, just a few little mementos here. A few years ago, I received the Wright Brothers Award, which was signed personally, I can see down there, by, by Wilbur Wright. I didn't think he was still alive, but apparently he is. So in order to do that, you have to survive 50 years and continuous flight, and not hurt anybody would be good. So that's one little item. Another one is I always joked with my wife Patsy that my career would be complete when I had made takeoffs and landings in all 50 states. And I got around quite a bit, but for some reason the powers that be kept me away from Idaho until this date, the 18th of August of 2003. I finally landed and took off in Sun Valley, and that was the 50th state. So my bride got me this to commemorate that. I don't know if you know who Murray Smith is, but he was the editor of this magazine, and I knew him personally, and he caught me and my partner Jerry one day at Washington National and said he was going to make us famous in aviation, put us on the cover of his magazine. And there was our names weren't even on there; they were inside the magazine. But the tall one there is Jerry Rebold. He was my boss at Peabody for 30 years, and there we are, looking at the manual to try to figure out how to fly a Citation. So there's that. This you probably don't even want to document, but this was one of our airplanes. This was a Citation S2. That fellow's name is Steve Credemeyer, the one over here. And I don't know who that character is. And Steve notably retired from Peabody shortly after I did, and is a volunteer for Wings of Hope. He's a great guy. This is just a quick picture of an airplane I bought when I had 100 hours of flying time. It's a Fairchild PT-19, and I got a very thorough checkout in this airplane. The guy who owned it said, make sure the oil's up to the top. If you put your finger in and it doesn't hit oil, put 4 more quarts in and try it again. She climbs and glides at 80. That was the extent of my checkout. Somehow I survived this, although a friend and partner of mine eventually crashed it because the 2 people in it forgot who was flying it. My goodness. Anyway, that's the PT-19. Here is another way that's I've spent some time that's vaguely related to aviation. This particular picture was taken down in West Memphis, Arkansas, but I've got a few hundred jumps, and I do skydiving. It's really the same as what I do in the stock market, start high and end low. This is a blue ribbon packet, and the FAA does this for people who receive the Wright Brothers Award, and this is a record of every document that has ever gone to the FAA in my entire flying career, all the written results and the medicals and all the check rides and everything else. So I guess in governmentese, this is the basic proof that I do have a pilot's license. I had one trip that was very, very meaningful to me, and I don't know whether I ought to talk about this later on, but there's a picture of me with one of our Senecas, and this trip is described in this article. This is the Jewish light, by the way. The thing that was significant on this trip was that it was on my birthday. And it was tremendously profound for me. I had been flying here for about a year, and the bottom line was that I helped a family like many of our other clients who really needed our help. The whole family, in order to find a job, which took 2 years for this guy. They lived in Steubenville, Ohio, and he finally found a job after 2 years. His sister was in an institution. She was 48 and weighed about 80 pounds. It was just, she was really in dire shape, and she was institutionalized. She had just about every disease known to man. So I finally, after 9 months, took her and her brother, who had gotten the job in Kansas. I took them to Kansas, and my goodness, when we got there, there were about 100 people at the airport. And as I climbed out of the airplane, this woman ran up and hugged me and said, "That's my sister, and thank you, thank you, thank you. We've been trying so hard to get her here. You've finally done this." And I said, "Well, I got way more out of this than you did." She said, "What do you mean by that?" And I said, "Well, today's my birthday." And she said, with tears in her eyes, she said, "You would do this instead of celebrating your birthday. You're such a great guy." I said, "I'm not a great guy." And this, being honored to have the ability and opportunity to do this, is the best birthday present I've ever got. And Carol has heard this story before.
I've heard this story. It's a great story.
And she is the one who engineered this article in the Jewish Light.
You still have that. That's so awesome.
I do. My daughter went to the extent of doing this, so
Wow, that's amazing.
that's the airport where I learned to fly. That's Arrow's Airport in Lafayette, Indiana. And this is the airplane that I got my multi-engine rating in. It's a Beech 18.
When is this? Is this the 70s or something?
Yes.
Okay.
Late,
I could tell by the haircut.
late 60s, yeah. Late 60s, early 70s. And I don't really have to go through it page by page, I don't think. I think my first solo might be in here. February 11th, 1968. Here's something interesting. Have you ever heard of Theodore Fujita?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you know who he is. I flew him around on a weather research project for a couple of years.
Wow.
And these are some of the time-lapse photos that we have. He was attempting to prove that if you went and, when a thunderstorm builds, typically the temperature would stop going down and start going back up again at the tropopause, which would fail to give support for the rising thunderstorm, but it has such inertia that it punches up through the tropopause into the troposphere and forms a dome. And his theory was that when the dome ran out of steam just because of inertia and fell back in, there would be a tornado underneath within the next 20 minutes. I don't believe he ever proved that, but we would have Learjets, two 20 series Learjets, and we'd go up to 45,000 feet and take 6 hours of time-lapse photos like this every 30 seconds. And anyway, he never proved this, but I spent a lot of time with him. He was a super smart guy. This was the first parachute I owned. I made 55 jumps on that. It's a Russian Paracommander. These are just a few of the folks that I flew around when I was flying charter.
Oh, like famous people?
Yeah. And that was fun. It was really fun. Just
Neil
because-
Diamond?
Yeah,
Cool.
you got to compare their public persona with what they were sort of really like.
That's neat.
And Ali and I got along famously. He's a Muslim and I'm Jewish, so there was no ham on the catering trays.
Right.
That was important to him.
That's funny. Yeah, I want to picture this. I think that's cool.
What's Jimmy like? Jimmy Buffett.
Exactly like he is in public. He is smart. That doesn't really come through that much in his public persona
Right,
unless
yeah.
you do business with him.
Oh, sure.
But he is so laid back.
Pretty laid back, yeah.
When I first flew him, he was an intro artist for the Eagles. And I had some of the Eagles in the airplane too. Glenn Fry was in there and so forth. And as we were going from Burbank to Cleveland, he came forward in the airplane. He said, "You guys can't believe how grateful I am to be there and to be able to do this and to be, you know, I've been singing in bars for 12 years now, and this is beginning to take off. This is
So you flew when he
fantastic."
was just starting to get popular.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
There was, in addition to the small airport, Aritz 3 Alfa Romeo in Lafayette, Indiana, there was another airport that was called Halsmer, Halsmer. The two guys who ran it, one was a current and one was a retired American Airlines pilot. And there was a fellow whose whole family I taught to fly, who thought in the late 40s, early 50s that it was a perfectly reasonable thing to have flying cars, one in every garage. So if you went out and there was a traffic jam, you just go out in the grass, fold the wings down, and take off. This actually flew. This was at Halsmer Airport. It was a flying car, and it actually flew and never crashed. Every once in a while, all through my career, even though I was flying things that burn kerosene most of the time, I would select a deserving soul who's really gaga about aviation and say, "Hey, you go find an airplane to fly, and you pay for the airplane, I'll teach you to fly free." This guy, his name is Doug Fittler, and that was his first solo. He has his private certificate, which he was interested in doing all his life. So I was with Peabody for 30 years, from 1982 to 2012.
Okay.
And
Wow.
I was there for 25 of those years. I was their director of maintenance and chief pilot. Which means I probably didn't do a very good job of either one of them, because either one of them was 10 full-time jobs.
Right.
This is a Challenger 300, absolutely fantastic airplane. That's 10 people nonstop to Bogota, Colombia, out of St. Louis. It's an EC-135, it's a twin-turbine helicopter. And this is part of our Gulfstream 550. All these are the Gulfstream. It's a hell of an airplane, nonstop from Beijing to St. Louis.
Wow.
In a svelte 13 hours and 20 minutes. Land with 4,000 pounds of gas. Well, I forgot that was in there. And if you're hungry in China, all you have to do is, this is right outside, well, around the corner from the top Hilton hotel in the world, Hilton Wangfuying in Beijing. And these street vendors are all over the place with these wonderful things that you can buy. The scorpions, by the way, are still alive, so they tend to screech a little bit when they put them in the
That's
oil.
gross.
Seahorses.
Wow.
Stay away
I
from,
forget what
stay away
kind
from the
of
street vendors,
bugs
don't they say that?
those were, but just it's a real privilege to fly, especially long haul for a corporation, because you get to see all sorts of things. Patsy and I eventually climbed to the top of this and stood right up there.
Where is that? Is that
That's
in Sydney?
the Sydney Harbor Bridge.
Oh, that's in Sydney. Cool.
Yeah, this is the Sydney Opera House.
Oh, neat.
Background here.
Yeah.
I took our new hawker down to Ixtapa, Zihuatanejo, and we couldn't get one of the engines started.
Oh no.
It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in aviation, trying to convince the people back home that we really had a mechanical problem when we were stuck in Zihuatanejo.
Right,
It was
yeah.
a very nice place.
Yeah.
This is the Great Wall. It's a good wall, but not a great wall. This is my last flight at Peabody, and
Okay.
fire trucks over at Lambert.
So they did that at Peabody and they did it at Wings of Hope.
So in the airlines, especially when folks feel real positively toward a pilot, they do this for him on his very last flight. And it's just a marker to say, you've
Well done.
gone here,
Yeah, yeah.
and gone there, and now you're coming through this last gate.
Yeah,
And
that's
you're done.
cool. That's neat.
When you taxi through that rain shower and say, I did this,